des shelf.
Hello, dear listeners. Here we are at Tallinn's Black Nights Film Festival. Basically, halfway through the whole festival, it's very long, goes about more than 2 weeks, 17 days. And yesterday just arrived Anne Marie Fleming from Canada. Hello, Anne Marie.
Hello, Lida.
And she has a great movie in competition that I was lucky enough to already be able to see. It's called Can I Have a Witness? And maybe you tell us just a little. This movie is a science fiction story, but it's not a kind of science fiction story one usually expects with a lot of special effects and very futuristic settings. It's a most realistic setup where people in a not so distant future live in a society where at first everything seems perfect, but people have a common agreement that they commit suicide at 50 to save resources. How did you come up with that idea, that story?
Well, this story is inspired by climate and climate action. And I started thinking about it a long time ago, before there was government-assisted end of life that we have in Canada now, and that's expanding. Before COVID, before we could see that governments around the world could make decisions quickly together that affect everybody, and where kitchen table conversations around the world were about what would we be willing to do for the greater good, and is what we're doing a good idea. And so I think the larger global ethics are something that people all over the world are thinking about at the same time. So I was inspired very much by Jonathan Swift, who was an Irish-English writer who in the 18th century wrote A Modest Proposal, which is talking about the famine, the potato famine they describe in Ireland. And
it's a satire,
it's a satire.
But it was taken seriously at the time.
That's right, where he suggested that the Irish eat their children because they have too many children, and this will solve overpopulation and protein. And so people were very upset about this, but it caused social change. And he said it completely seriously. And so I took a nod from that. So my film in no way gives a nod to whether I think it's an absurd idea to leave at 50, but obviously 50 is, people ask me why that age, and well, it's because it hurts, because it's young enough to hurt. But in this world, it's before you start to consume more than you are giving back. And in this case, we consume too much on this planet, and in this case I'm saying we consume too much time. But the question really is, if you believe that 50 is too young to leave, and most of us are living quite a lot older than that, that just in terms of personal agency, we think that what we can do as an individual is not meaningful, but there's 8 billion of us, and there's going to be 10 billion pretty soon. And every day, everything we do as an organism, as part of this ecosystem that is the planet, really does make a difference.
And I also think that this subject and also the age that you choose, because that was also one thing that really got me thinking, like, why 50, why not 30? Because 30, everybody would say, oh, you're ripped away in the prime of your life. 60 wouldn't hurt so much anymore. So, but we have to also consider that there, especially in the global south, there are still to this day many countries where people just they die at 45.
Exactly. So 50 seems like in this world, which is beautiful,
you have to be privileged.
You're privileged, right? For the privileged world, for the global north, or the whatever you want to call it, the Western world. A lifestyle goes down, lifespan goes down. But for a lot of people, and mainly the global south, this is not a surprise. 50 is not a surprise, and the lifestyle would go up a lot, because this is really about true democracy, true trans-species democracy, eradication of poverty, and mitigating as much as we can effects of climate change. So big topics, And it's not a proselytizing film at all. Hopefully it keeps its politics close to its chest. It's a film that wants to bring up these questions and give space for discussion.
There's no moralizing in the film. You don't say this is good or bad, or it's not directed in a way to appear consciously horrible or very enticing. There are good and bad things in this future world which we see. For example, there's also the aspect that all technology or higher digital technology has been banned. That means people don't have smartphones. Even to have something like a refrigerator or a phone or electricity is rare in this world. So the beauty that we see is very superficial, and one could also challenge like what does that life cost. For example, my first idea was, if we have so little technology, what about medicine? That means nobody has like something like I don't know, what if somebody has heart failure or something? Yeah,
Well,
you couldn't have a peacemaker.
Of Daniel, one of the leads in the film, of course, he has a heart condition, and he has had the benefit of medical intervention. And obviously we can see, because at end of life you do get some perks. You do get electricity for a couple of weeks if you desire it. So we know that this exists, that yes, there's because the backstory, the deeper world that is in this film that is not all represented is there. There is structure, but there's only as needed. It's much less available. But yeah, we just use less. We just use less. And in terms of technology, this film is in the near future, because photography has been banned, that teenagers have to do service after high school. And so if they're artistically inclined, they can become documenters where they witness end-of-life protocols to make sure everything's good. So it's Kira's first day on the job, and Daniel is showing her the ropes. And what's funny is that, when people leave at 50, and so Ellie, who's the mother, Kira's mother, who was the first documenter back when we decided that we were going to have this world agreement. She's now everybody past 50 is gone. Everybody who was, this is now the people who made these agreements when they were teenagers or when they were young people. Now they have to walk the walk, and now they realize that there's no lived longer experience. The kids don't know anything more than what they've been brought up with. Like, they don't miss smartphones because they just weren't around. And we think that that's so odd because it's so ubiquitous in our world right now, but we forget things like that. You look at election cycles, you look even at COVID, people forget how much, people forget the fear, people forget how much people suffered. Now it's a story, and it's inconvenient, and of course there's some people living with, the devastating toll of it when we had the pandemic, but also now it's not like it went away, but people just don't talk about it anymore. Now only some people live it, So I think that our memories are very, very, very short, and so this world is not so difficult to imagine as a reality.
You know that in Soylent Green there is this suicide rooms where people can just go in and say like they want to die if they have a certain age?
Well, suicide is not the, I mean, I call it end of life, and yeah, I guess technically it is suicide, but that's not the focus. And it's a very peaceful film. It's more about how precious life is than about us having to leave it. It's like, how do we live, and how do we want to live? Because I think in the West, or in Canada at least, we live in a very fearful, a death fear society. We don't want to deal with death. We don't want to talk about death. And I think more than death itself, which it's the one experience besides being born that we all share, and that is inevitable, is that it's fear. It's fear of dying. It's oh God, I went on a long tangent. What was your question?
It was more if there were inspirational
Yes,
stories or films.
And so the films, if I would say tonally, the film that inspired me was Correda's Afterlife. I don't know if you know it. It's a film from the early 2000s where everybody's already dead and they're in this middle place where they're having films made of their favorite memories, but what they want to remember when they go on to, the next place. Which it's such a beautiful film. It's so gentle, and I also think of this in terms of the themes of nature and a family. I think of it kind of like a live action Miyazaki film in some ways, because it also deals with histories and the fantastical in a very gentle way. Like, this isn't a children's film by any means, but it's definitely a young person's film,
And I wanted to also ask you actually how you decided on the tone of the film, because it's very idyllic almost. It's very beautiful. There are light colors, bright colors. It's not at all dark or sad or scary in any way. So this is also both unusual for a science fiction story, and especially if we consider that their death seems to be the main, and saying goodbye seems to be the main subject of the story. So was that always the idea, to have it so beautiful and tranquil?
Well, the way films evolve as they're being made, and as I said, I started off thinking that this was going to be a satire, but I always loved the idea of describing it as a Terrence Malick comedy, like Days of Heaven, where everything is so beautiful, but also sad. So the fact that it was shot in Powell River, and I used to teach up there, and I taught teenagers film and animation, and that's where teenagers became the central characters for me in what they were dealing with up there. Powell River is a place where it used to have a very big economy with logging, lumber, the pulp mill. That's all gone now. So it has been economically depressed. There's now a new economy that alternative industries, craft beer, upcycling, but artists are coming. It's like a different way of thinking of the place, and also the Tla'amin, which are the indigenous people who were displaced by the lumber economy, are now sort of taking more of that place back again. So the fact it was Powell River, I wanted to, which is just so beautiful there, and the theme of the film is not how are we going to die, it's how beautiful and precious life is, and what are we willing to do to make it good for everybody.
And in the focal point of the story are a mother and her daughter, even more so than the relationship between the young daughter, who becomes a documenter of the farewell ceremonies, is the relationship to her mother, which I think is kind of a new thing. In the past, it was usually either father and son in the focus. Now we have often also, especially by female directors, stories of mothers and daughters, which I think it's really a great thing. Was that, how did you develop that, or that idea to focus on mother-daughter relationships in that movie?
Well, it's interesting. Sandra Oh, who plays the mother, Ellie, she was saying that she thinks of Ellie as a fantasy mother, that her kindness, her patience, even some of the things she says, there's some scenes that aren't in the film. I couldn't put everything in the film. So maybe some of this isn't there, but the things that she says to her daughter are things that you want to hear from a mother, that perhaps not all of us hear, that it's, which I thought was interesting. I hadn't really thought about it that way. It's, so much of the world is about repression, about what we choose not to say so that we can make the world tolerable. And so I think even though the mother is, I think you're right, the mother's not the main character, but I think that relationship is really the core of the film. it's something that just came. Like I don't want to sound pompous or anything like this, but I really do think that as artists or as writers, as filmmakers, we're really just like we say, consider film as a medium, but I think really the filmmaker is the medium, is that these things just come through you, they write themselves and they become themselves, and even through the casting process and all the people who brought their takes on the film to the project, it just gathers its own momentum and it becomes what it is.
How did you find Sandra Oh for the role?
Well, Sandra and I have known each other for a very long time, and we collaborated on Window Horses, which is an animated feature that I did a few years ago, where she came on, she did the voice, she helped with casting, she helped amplify the message, which was sort of like a peace, love, understanding message. Interestingly, back in the early 90s, we were supposed to do a film together. It was a mother-daughter film that I had written, where the mother was dead, and the daughter has all of these conversations with her that she wasn't able to when she was alive. And of course, Sandra was the daughter. So it's very interesting. So many years later, where she's the mother, and it's sort of the situation is very different.
You already had your film presented in Toronto, if I'm not mistaken, on the film festival, and I wonder, how did you feel about the reactions that it stirs up in the audience? Are they are they upset by the themes or by the tolerant approach towards death and ending one's life, or is there maybe even a suggestion we should do something like that in society?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's so funny that the conversation, you said yourself that you think it is the main subject, because I didn't. I thought the main subject was the climate. But the conversation is, would you do this? And it depends a lot. It's generational, just like the characters in the film and their relationship to the world order. It's the same. The younger you are, the more you think this is a reasonable solution. So if you're closer to 50, you feel very implicated, and if you're older than that, I don't know. I mean, like, I started writing this film when I was younger than 50, and now that was like so long ago. It's interesting. Yeah, I think that to be able to see it in a theater with a lot of other people, it's such an interesting experience because it's very emotional. Like, people are feeling emotions for very many different reasons, and it's so funny. Some of the people who've been the most touched by it, actually, they work in the end of life in industry, if I can say it.
It is an industry because you have to pay like thousands to get it.
No, not people who are doing MAID, but even like doctors, counselors, people who work in hospices, people, like all of this before this eventuality, or quite apart from it. It's just about acceptance. People who are dealing with people who have to come to accept that they've been given an expiry date. We all have an expiry date, but we just really don't think about it. So I'm sure, that for the festivals, I don't know if they'll have it here, but they have like a trigger warning that we're dealing with the subject of death and dying and suicide. There's, a note at the end of the film, for a helpline that you can call, because we had grief counselors available when we were shooting the film, because it's such a tender subject, and you just don't know how people are going to feel it. It's very much based on their own experiences. I had a question. I was just at the Real Asian Festival in Toronto before I came here a couple of days ago, and somebody said they had just gone through MAID with their mother, of course, and they thought that this was a very dangerous world that I had, put forward, and was I really suggesting, like, she couldn't see that this was not a metaphor, but a fable, because she had just gone through it. And that's the thing when you make something and you just don't know how it's going to be accepted. And as a filmmaker, you just have to stand back and let it be. And as you said, like, this is not a moralizing film. It just gives you a lot of space to think. And like a lot of other films I've made, I'm always terrified. I don't know how it's going to be accepted. I can't control that, you know. And I guess, but I do want a discussion. I want a discussion about how we live, what we owe to each other, you know, how we live, and I guess a discussion about, you know, how we die.
An underlying theme that seems constantly present in the film are class issues, because in the future world that you picture, everybody seems to be upper middle class. The underclass has completely disappeared, which is kind of scary because you always wonder where they've gone. And the situation you describe, it's actually, I personally wouldn't say it's more acceptable the younger you are. I would say it's more acceptable the closer you are to underclass, because for the underclass the situation is already reality.
Yes.
But this thing would also be equalizing. So did you think a lot and research a lot into class issues?
Well, absolutely. It has, you know, people are saying to me, well, you're talking about this socialist, universal income. Like, where's the money, you know, where's the economy? Who does this? Who does that? Blah, blah, all these questions. I mean, I have to say, generally, yes, everything you said, absolutely true. Did I granularly discuss this in the film? No. So many questions. Yeah, this world looks like that there's been some sacrifices made. But for most of the world, this is an uplift. Well, I don't want to say uplift because that sounds like judgmental, but yeah, it's a longer life. It's a more quality of life,
And more time.
More time. You have more time. There was but you know, you don't see a lot of people in this film because it's end of life, and so I try to say, partly that's budget, but you know, I tried to say that it's your choice. You know, at the end, whether you are surrounded by family, you know, there's hard questions about, you know, how many children you're allowed to have or not allowed to have, you know, what is government, you know, overreach. It's so complex. I mean, it's interesting that you would bring that up because, I mean, there's no story, I mean, there's nothing that you can say in this world. There's no film that you can make, there's no story you can tell that isn't about, you know, race, class, and culture. It's always there. It's just that sometimes we're just taking it for granted, you know, like it's like it's invisible, but it's not invisible. So, I mean, even these discussions, and you know, I don't want to. Well, but here's the thing. before I say something else, is that the film is trying to touch those subjects without being political, you know, and so where you are absolutely in your life, you have a different understanding to this. You know, if film festivals are elitist in some ways, you know, film
Absolutely,
is
totally
right?
elitist.
So very few people,
in every way,
right? So very few people will see this film at this festival, and maybe through, you know, dissemination, maybe even your interview will reach people who will never see the film, or who listens to this, or who cares about this, or why do we care about this, or are we taught to care about this, and what kind of education system is that? There's just so many levels of that, you know. I'll tell you what, I talked to a homeless guy many years ago when I was coming up with this story. I was walking down the street and there's this guy, he looked like he had no legs, he was having a smoke, he was on the ground, and he was, you know, bumming for change. So I asked him whether I could talk to him about this project.
Yeah.
You know, I said, you know, I've got this idea, and he gave me his card, and he said, I'm very busy, and you'll have to make an appointment. And so I got together with him a couple weeks later, and I told him this premise about how to, climate change, true trans-species democracy, blah, 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 blah. You all have to leave life at 50 before you start taking more out of the system than you put back. And he said, sounds like a great idea to me. It sounds like a great idea. He's somebody who was my age and who looked like about 30 years older. He'd lived on the street all of his life until he had a heart attack, and he was brought into the social system, and he spent his time, he just bums cigarettes for fun, but otherwise he has good housing, he has good medicine, and spends his time reaching out to lonely, homeless people. So it was interesting, because I felt so guilty telling this story. Like, can I even tell the story? And it's not like he speaks for all people, but I was very aware of how bourgeois my ideas were, and so yeah, funny. I hadn't thought about that for a while, because once I'd committed, you just go through it. But I don't know, sometimes when you start asking these sorts of questions, it paralyzes you. You can't do anything, you can't do anything. So for me, this was very much an action, like it was a climate action on my behalf, and the story that I'm telling about death and end of life, which I'm in complete denial that that's what this film is about, because obviously that's what it's all about. But for me, I just saw it as this, like I'm in this whirl, right? That I saw it as a metaphor for climate, and it's funny. It's really funny. I mean, the film is just being seen for audiences in the last, just started, like a couple of festivals, last couple of months, and so I'm learning more what it's really about through talking to other people.
An important detail in the film is the art that is created by the daughter, who's a documenter of the end-of-life ceremonies. How did you decide on which kind of art to use and which style of art? For example, it's drawings, it's black and white drawings. It could have also been like color paintings or something different. And how did you find an artist to create these worlds?
Oh. Well, at first there was going to be a lot more animation, and it was going to move, and it was going to be very colorful. And this was my idea in the script, to represent all of this, these feelings, like I said, that all this repression could be seen in the art, and then shot the film, and the film is so emotional, and it just didn't need that kind of, it didn't need so much in that story. There's still animation, but it's very subtle. It's very subtle. And obviously, who was gonna be the artist? Whose art was represented? At first, I was going to work with this young person, and a lot of their art is represented in the film, actually on the walls, as some of young Kia's work. But I landed up. So Pal River is way up the coast. I don't know if you've ever been to Vancouver.
Not to Vancouver now.
But well, you take 2 ferries and about an hour and a half drive, and then more driving, and you're in Pal River. And if you drive even further, you get to this tiny community called Lund. And in Lund, there's this tidal art center. And the person who runs it right now, his name is Prashant Miranda. He's Indian, but he's been living in Canada for many, many years. And he finds himself in the middle of nowhere, at the end of the world. And he is a person who travels the world and documents it in his sketchbook. So he's actually somebody who is just a life drawer. And it just seems so perfect that he was there. And so I used him. So he's channeling this teenage girl. And we actually had him on set drawing. There's so many drawings that he did that we didn't land up using, and they're all in the credits. But so that we could, if we changed the angle or anything, I guess we didn't have to do it like this. He could always have done it after the fact, but we really wanted the live drawing to be part of the experience. So he's drawing on set as the actor Kira Jang is being the character. So all these things just evolve, like there's this song, the Ink Spots, I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire, which, it's featured a few times in the film. And
we see it also sing on the screen.
Yes. So that's one of the choices, for End of Life. And it's like, oh, why that song? I mean, it started off, it was public domain, right? I wanted something that was in this ilk that talked lightly about, of course it's about love, but the words could be about the climate. And so I liked it. I liked it. That's basically it. I liked it. And then, but like every choice you have to defend. And the scene, at the end when they're by the rocks talking, and exactly, when the band is actually playing that song, there's a hotel just around the corner, and it turns out that the Ink Spots opened that hotel in 1964. They were asked to play there, and the art director, David Perrin, he happened to find this. While he was doing prep, he found the advertisement for them. Like these little things. It's always like, why did you choose this? Like sometimes you don't know, and then it's the perfect thing. So yes, that's a long answer as usual.
And now that you're, after all these work process, are in Tallinn and presenting your film within the main competition, it's competing for the main prize, how do you feel?
I'm always nervous presenting the film, and just generally any film, and even though I've been making films for a very long time and it's not my first film, nothing changes.
And it's a strange question since you're just presenting this one film, but do you already have new ideas that you work on movie-wise?
Well, of course I have other projects, like projects take so long to come to fruition, or they can. So yes, I do. I have another film about ethics, Gift Horse. All of these are based on something in my life. There was, they were finding envelopes filled with money in the public washroom, and on the news it was presented as somebody was trying to destabilize society. I thought it was so interesting.
That's a bad thing. They just want money. Oh my God, which villain did that? Who would do something like that?
So that's fun. That's fun. It's also a film that is talking about ethics. But
that sounds certainly like a very interesting story. Until then, we have Can I Get a Witness at the Tallinn Film Festival. If you're not here at Black Nights, then you can certainly see it at the usual theatrical release. It will get a wide international release. I'm Lida Bach. I'm here with Anne Marie Fleming. Thank you a lot, Anne Marie, for the interview.
Thank you, Lida.
Shelf.